Well, it is a New Testament concept, but that doesn't mean it's new to the New Testament. It is the only way that God has related to his people from the very beginning. So we read of it explicitly first when Abram believes God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. This means that Abraham did not have a righteousness of his own. It means that God had to put on his ledger next to his name a standing of righteous that Abraham didn't have of himself and that he could not earn. That righteousness that had to come from Christ himself. And Romans 3, which is explaining in great detail how justification works because of the cross of Christ. The real surprise there is the way, well, to me it was a surprise when I first read it, but that Paul isn't only explaining, you who have become a Christian after Jesus died, this is how you get his righteousness. He's also pointing out that from Abraham on, in the Old Covenant, it was sort of paid forward. They were waiting for that righteousness to be earned by Christ in his life and death, but it was already credited to them. He shows his justice, how he was able to pass over the sins committed before time. From Abraham on, you see it so easily. Again, the Psalms, everything is easiest seen in the Psalms. Blessed is the one whose sins are forgiven, whose transgressions are covered. Blot away my iniquity, cleanse me from within. The Psalms constantly describe the righteous as the ones who rely on the Lord, as the ones who trust in the Lord. And what you see these righteous ones doing, who trust in the Lord, is they're constantly confessing their sins openly, knowing that while they deserve punishment, they're standing on their knees before a forgiving Father who forgives their sins in Christ. But you can even see it earlier on, before Abraham. Once Adam fell, everybody inherited that punishment which is a corrupt nature that does not want to please God, that wants to sin. So we talk sometimes about you're not a sinner because you sin, rather you sin because you're a sinner. But the Old Testament answer is even more shocking than that, which is that it's not that you will be punished because you sin because you're a sinner. Rather, it's you sin because you're a sinner, and the reason you're a sinner is that that's the punishment you get for being descended from Adam, because in Adam you sinned. And that means before Genesis 12, what you're seeing is a completely lost race for 10 chapters, from 3 to 11. And yet there you see Adam and Eve, not in the garden, but in a relationship with the Lord, in a real relationship with the Lord. You see all manner of bizarre things. You see Noah being righteous before the Lord. You see even Cain being protected and somehow treated specially by the Lord after his murder of Abel has been exposed. The thing you don't see ever is somebody working hard to please God and then being told, well done, that's what you were meant to do, and you did it. Now, I think actually the sort of the proof of the pudding really comes down to, what did Jesus say to the Pharisees? Because we can sometimes have this idea, I certainly used to have this idea when I was a young Christian, that the law was meant to tell you, the Pharisees were right to try to obey the law and earn their salvation, and that Jesus came to sort of say, well done, that's what you were meant to do. I've come to change all that. You're no longer meant to work your way to God. From now on, it's going to be faith alone. It's going to be grace alone. That is not the interaction that Jesus has with the Pharisees. Jesus keeps saying to them, what are you doing? Haven't you read? This attempt to make yourself right with God legalistically, he does not even spend half a second saying, well done, that's the old way. Now let me tell you about the new. Jesus talks in terms of complete continuity. The way to God has always been that God comes to you, that he comes to you by grace, that he comes to you undeserved, despite who you are and what you have done, that he comes to you with the righteousness of Christ to give you. And that is why it's so ugly when the church becomes proud and begins to try to impress God and begins to imagine that we're better than anybody else. It's why it's so particularly ugly when pastors give in to the temptation to preen ourselves, to think, well, people had better respect me because after all, I'm a respectable man. I'm not like all these other people over there who are capable of base sins. I only commit middle-class sins, thank you very much. Not so. From Adam onwards, it has always had to be that God bridges the whole gap between heaven and my depraved heart.